Greetings, adventurers. You're listening to The Quiet Journeys of Professor Atwood with me, Professor Atwood. I'm glad you're here, and I can't wait to tell you about my latest journey. Don't worry, it's a safe space. I'll handle all the danger for you. I designed these stories to help you relax, chill anxiety, and go to sleep. Maybe they'll even put a smile on your face, even if it's a sleepy smile. So please, settle in, relax, and prepare to quietly drift off with me to parts known, unknown, and even some places in between. Comfortable? Very well. Let's get underway. Good evening, adventurers. I hope you're doing well. I also hope you're all cozy and settled in because tonight I'm going to tell you about how we dealt with our very unexpected and very large problem on the International Space Station. As you remember from last time, we were on our way back to Earth from a successful mission on Mars when we received a cryptic distress call from the ISS involving water bears. When we stopped and investigated, we found that the station had been overrun with tardigrades. Now, as I said before, they are normally harmless and barely even visible to the naked eye, but these were the size of, well, bears, which of course made them more than live up to their nickname, water bears. We extracted the remaining ISS crew over to the Journeyman, and after treating their injuries, we formed a party to retake the ISS. I know, sounds exciting, right? We made it to the tardigrade science lab, and that's where I made a discovery that formed a theory as to what was going on. If I was correct, I would have a roadmap on how to resolve this situation. And I will tell you all about how we dealt with this rather large problem and its unusual cause in a moment. But first, I want to mention again a note about the advertising you may or may not be hearing on the show. It is programmatically inserted, Bradley tells me, and while it sounds very scientific, I think it just means automatic. However, some of you were commenting that the occasional ad at the end was a bit intrusive and sometimes was waking you up. Well, we don't want that to happen, so we're going to work on putting all of the programmatically inserted ads at the beginning so as to not break the story flow. Now, of course, if you don't want any ads at all, you can join the White Cat Adventurers Club. I'd also like you to rate the show with a bunch of stars. There's a little nudge for you. I mean, reviews are great too. It's always nice to read pleasant things about what we're doing over here. We seem to be a bit stuck on ratings and reviews, so our number hasn't changed for a little bit. So we'd love to see that number climb up a bit if you would be so kind. Also, this is important. Don't forget to tell your friends directly about the show and post about it wherever you post about things. The more adventurers, the merrier. And as I've said before, we also have a Science and Adventure Helper donation link on the homepage. You could just go to whitecatentertainment.com and click donate for a one-time donation. Then you can do it whenever you like for whatever you like. But if you do want more, there is the White Cat Adventurers Club. We do have some new members, and it's much, much appreciated. Thank you and welcome. You can get sometimes early access and ad-free listening to the show, and also an exclusive look at my very irregular journal. That's exclusive only to White Cat Adventurers Club members, and it has some journeys about possibly a ghostly train sighting and all sorts of things, and alligators wielding tools, and some of my adventures that I haven't narrated and I've just put down in my journal. They are at the White Cat Adventures Club. You could read about those. And also, what's interesting about the process over at Patreon. If you just want the journals, you could search on a keyword and just read all those at once. You can, or if you just want to see the graphic novel artwork, everything has like a keyword you could jump to. Or if you want the What Are You Watching exclusive episodes, they're there as well. So you can kind of enjoy the exclusive access any way you like. And Science and Exploring is expensive, and your support helps make it happen. And it's just $5 a month, and then you could show your support for the show. But there are different tiers with different rewards. There's higher ones, and if you want an exclusive t-shirt and the graphic novels, those are at the $10 tier and above. So please go to patreon.com/whitecatentertainment and enjoy the access your way. And you'll probably get a thank you email from Bradley as well. So, all right, let's get back to the story. We were there in the International Space Station's Tardigrade Specific Science Lab, with all the tardigrades enlarged to a quite dangerous size, and they were also, well, missing. But that actually turned out to be a situation that worked out in our favor, as it gave us time to safely search the lab. And that's when I found the Astronaut ice cream wrappers. Turns out Professor Andrews did not keep his workstation meticulously clean, as per protocol, let alone engaging in continuous breaches involving eating snacks during delicate interstellar experimentation. But there was more going on here than just protocol breaches and off-the-books snacking. How could astronaut ice cream affect the tardigrades in such an unusual manner and make them, well, grow? Or maybe it wasn't technically growth at all. Maybe it was something else. Regardless, they had gotten a taste for it, and that explained why they weren't in the lab anymore. They were off raiding the food stores where all the astronaut ice cream was kept, and we would have to stop them sooner rather than later, because if they got any bigger, they'd be causing hull breaches and the ISS would become lost and unrepairable. So time was of the essence here. I finished my sweep of the lab and called Professor Andrews over. Captain Jack was still searching for any other clues, and our security officer/mercenary Dolores and our medic Aaron were keeping watch. I felt the answer was in Professor Andrews' notes. I told everyone about my theory that astronaut ice cream being eaten in a lab had caused the tardigrades to grow to an unusual size. They all looked at me skeptically, which I understood, and frankly, I'm used to it by now. I mentioned there was another factor at work here, and I knew the key was somewhere in Professor Andrews' notes. Professor Andrews looked at me the most skeptically and offered me his notes to peruse. From what I knew about tardigrades and their unusual traits, my theory offered the most likely explanation, albeit quite an unusual and unexpected one. I searched through Professor Andrews' handwritten notes, and it took a little more time than I expected, since his handwriting was difficult to decipher. Like a toddler had written these notes after discovering a closet full of M&Ms. But anyway, he was there to translate, so that made things a little quicker. There were the usual notes about the tardigrades being able to survive in the harshest conditions, including outer space, but that wasn't what I was looking for. Professor Andrews had covered all that in his presentation earlier aboard the Journeyman. No, there was something else. Something about their DNA. Actually, it was about what wasn't part of their DNA. I remember reading something about this earlier from a colleague's paper at the science convention in Munich. And then I found it. In addition to the remarkable survival skills, water bears were also DNA thieves. Now, scientists have discovered that tardigrades possess yet another extreme claim to fame. Their genome contains the most foreign DNA of any animal species known. Rather than inheriting all of their genes from their ancestors, tardigrades get a whopping 1/6 of their genetic makeup from unrelated plants, bacteria, fungi, and archaeans, researchers reported. The bizarre mashup highlights the fact that species can take shape in much less linear ways than commonly imagined. When most people think of the diversity of life and flow of genetic information, they picture a tree with big branches generating small ones, but without any connection between the limbs, says study leader Thomas Boothby, a Life Sciences Research Foundation postdoctoral fellow at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. He said, "We're beginning to realize that instead of the tree of life, it might be more appropriate to think of the web of life." I think that's a good way of putting it, for sure. Boothby turned to the tardigrade genome in the hopes of uncovering the most basic underpinnings of the creature's extreme survival strategies. To catalog every gene, he and his colleagues first extracted and sequenced many short chunks of DNA from thousands of tardigrades. Using a rather robust computer program, they stitched those sequences back together to produce the code in its entirety. When we did that, we initially saw that there were a lot of genes that looked like they didn't come from animals, Boothby said. Our gut reaction was that we messed something up and must have contaminated our sample. To double check, the team turned to the polymerase chain reaction, a method that amplifies targeted regions of genetic material only if they match with specific primers. In this case, they wanted to see if they could amplify animal and bacterial genes as single units, which would only be possible if they were physically linked within the same genome. We did that for over 100 genes with 98% success, Boothby said. Convinced the reading of the genome was correct, the team then reconstructed the evolutionary ancestry of specific gene sequences. This confirmed that what looked like foreign genes actually were just that, rather than lookalikes developed by tardigrades themselves. The results told us pretty unambiguously that genes that look foreign really are coming from non-animals, Boothby said. All told, the tardigrade genes are made of 17.5% of foreign material. Most of these strange genes have bacterial origins. Thousands of species are represented within the tardigrade's genetic makeup. Many of the genes are known or suspected to play roles in stress tolerance from their original owners, which is interesting because that makes it sound like it's targeted and deliberate. "I think the findings are extremely surprising," said Andrew Roger, a biologist at the Dalhousie University in Canada. "That an animal would acquire such a large proportion of its genes from foreign sources is amazing and unprecedented. In some cases, foreign genes have actually replaced tardigrade ones, while in others, tardigrades kept their own versions but incorporated single or multiple copies from one or more bacterial species. We speculate that this wasn't a one-time event, but probably an ongoing thing and may still be happening today," Boothby said. Researchers have known for years that bacteria and other microbes can engage in horizontal gene transfer, the swapping of genetic material between unrelated species. But only recently have scientists begun to realize that this method of genetic development can also occur in animals. Compared to tardigrades, other animals' genomes, including humans, contain very little foreign matter. Until now, rotifiers, another microscopic aquatic animal, held the record at 8 or 9%. For tardigrades and rotifiers, the heavy dose of foreign genes likely plays a significant role in bestowing them with superior survival skills. If they can acquire DNA from organisms already living in stressful environments, they may be able to pick up some of the same tricks, Boothby said. But precisely how tardigrades manage to cobble together so much foreign genetic material remains unknown. Boothby and his colleagues suspect that the animal's ability to dry out and reanimate might play a role, When tardigrades desiccate, their genomes fragment. After life-giving liquid restores them, the membranes surrounding their cells remain leaky for a while, and as the cells quickly work to repair their own genomes, they may accidentally work in some DNA from the environment. Interesting. Accidentally or on purpose, I wondered. Tardigrades were well known for their survival skills, and we were in space. I mean, that was it, really. What was it? Asked Professor Andrews. I explained. The tardigrades could absorb and cobble together DNA from their environment. Well, what if that environment involved astronaut ice cream? Obviously, there was still a lot we didn't know about tardigrade genomes, so while it was quite unusual for the tardigrades to work in, well, freeze-dried ice cream into their DNA, they were known for adapting to their environment, and here in outer space, they most likely thought that astronaut ice cream was part of their environment, which made sense the way Professor Andrews was leaving wrappers around everywhere. Professor Andrews then admitted some of the Neapolitan flavor did indeed fall into the petri dishes accidentally while he was using the microscope. So, that's exactly what happened. And due to the freeze-dried nature of the ice cream, once it was rehydrated, it expanded and kept expanding. And the tardigrades seemed to like the astronaut ice cream almost as much as Professor Andrews did, and they were willing to tear apart the station to get more. As I explained my theory, everyone's skepticism began to wane, and we had to come up with a plan to get an oversized tardigrade back in the lab. But we would need bait. Dolores offered to go back to the Journeyman to ask Jillian for more astronaut ice cream, but I turned to Professor Andrews and said that wouldn't be necessary, would it? Professor Andrews once again had a sheepish look on his face and said no, it would not. He pulled out a pack of Rocky Road from his lab coat. He offered us all some, but everyone politely and somewhat uncomfortably declined. Dolores took the astronaut ice cream from Professor Andrews and said she would be the one to lay down the bait. I offered to help, but she said no, she had this. I told her to put little amounts by the hatches leading into the lab. She smiled and commented that, as a mercenary, she knew how bait worked. Fair enough. Dolores took the pack of Rocky Road from Professor Andrews, who, for a moment, looked disappointed at the loss of his astronaut ice cream, and then she cautiously walked out of the hatch to lay down some bait. She clearly had done this before. Well, I'm not sure with giant tardigrades, but maybe with game animals in the wild, or even pirates looking for gold doubloons. Soon the bait was placed, and the only thing to do next was wait. I had briefed the rest of the party on what to do once we had a giant tardigrade, and everyone got into position. As it turns out, we didn't have to wait long. The tardigrades detected the dehydrated treat almost instantly and made their way towards the lab. Unfortunately, there was more than one. This would get a little tricky. But with a nod and a wink, Dolores was on it. There were 3 heading towards us, and Dolores had held some Rocky Road back and had 2 of them follow her. The other one headed straight for us in the lab. It sniffed around and entered the lab looking for the delicious dehydrated treat. It was generally ignoring us. I gave a nod to Aaron, Captain Jack, and Professor Andrews. We tackled the giant tardigrade, which is something I honestly thought I would never say, and I've said a lot, as you know. We managed to get it into one of the empty kangaroo cages, which is a whole other story on what else they were doing up at the International Space Station, so I won't get into that now. Phase 1 of my plan was complete. For the next phase, I needed help from the ISS crew, since I didn't know the full layout of the space station. Certain areas were kept off the blueprints, of course. Anyway, I needed Captain Jack and Professor Andrews to go to the galley. Well, I mean, that's a bit generous of a term for what the ISS had compared to the Journeyman, and get their food dehydrator. Professor Andrews said they had a deluxe model that hydrated and dehydrated food in large quantities, because in space, you'll need to do both. You see, freeze-drying and other drying methods remove most of the water in foods. This food type, once rehydrated, provides a more solid-type diet and adds variety to the space flight menu. Interestingly, on board the space shuttle, dehydrated foods and drinks made up a significant part of the menu selection. The major reason for using these dehydrated foods and drinks is because water was produced by the fuel cells as a byproduct, which made water abundantly available for space shuttle food preparation. Now, as I mentioned before, a significant weight reduction is achieved by rehydratable food and drinks. Now, obviously things have changed in the post-Space Shuttle days. As you remember, the last Space Shuttle flight, Space Shuttle Atlantis, completed its 33rd and final mission, landing on runway 15 at Kennedy Space Center's Shuttle Landing Facility on the morning of Thursday, July 21st, 2011. It was the 20th night landing at KSC, with 78 total, and the 26th night landing in the history of the Space Shuttle program. There's a little bit of Space Shuttle landing trivia for you. But getting back to food hydration and dehydration. For the International Space Station, it's a little different. Electrical energy requirements are best met by using a renewable energy source. Solar arrays, which convert solar energy into electrical energy, do not produce water as a byproduct. The ISS Food Manifest has reduced the amount of food rehydratables significantly. Professor Andrews' Astronaut ice cream being the significant exception. Drinks, however, are still best handled in a rehydratable package for storage ease. And this was where Professor Andrews had gotten into trouble. But I think this is also where we could get out of it. Professor Andrews and Captain Jack would retrieve the food hydrator and dehydrator, and Aaron and Dolores would stay here in the lab with me, with the rather irritated giant tardigrade trapped in a kangaroo cage. Finally, we gave it the rest of the Rocky Road Astronaut ice cream just to put it in a better mood. It ate the ice cream happily, then settled down and went to sleep. At least I think it did. With a tardigrade of any size, it's hard to tell. Captain Jack and Professor Andrews headed for the ISS galley and brought the remaining astronaut ice cream with them if they got in a pinch. I was pretty confident about their safety, as the tardigrades were all concentrating their efforts on the storage area where the rest of the astronaut ice cream was kept, so that way to and from the galley should be clear. While we waited for them to return, I thought about the fact that despite the expansions and upgrades, the ISS was designed, well, in the 1980s. The truth is, it wasn't going to be here much longer in any case. I mean, that was no reason to let renegade giant tardigrades take it over, but still. You see, in January 2022, NASA announced a planned date of January 2031 to deorbit the ISS using a deorbit spacecraft module and direct any remnants into a remote area of the South Pacific Ocean. NASA will launch the deorbiting spacecraft a year before re-entry, docking at the Harmony forward port after the removal of the Axiom orbital segment. The spacecraft would only be functional during the final days of ISS, once the station's orbit has decayed to about 140 miles. The deorbiting spacecraft would then conduct one or more orientation burns to lower the perigee to 99 miles, followed by a final deorbiting burn. But this won't be the end of the story, of course. While NASA may be focusing on long-range spacecraft and exploration in the future, and of course focusing on terraforming Mars, it's possible a new International Space Station would replace the ISS, possibly from the private sector and funded by NASA. Something with much more modern technology and facilities. But that was still years away, and we had to deal with the here and now of a giant tardigrade infestation. Thankfully, Captain Jack and Professor Andrews returned quickly, and they indeed encountered no trouble getting the hybrid hydrator-dehydrator from the ISS galley. I made some adjustments to it on the fly and approached the possibly sleeping captive giant tardigrade. I set it to dehydrate and, as best I could, targeted one of the tardigrade's 6 legs. I turned it up full power and it instantly shrunk the leg of the tardigrade, who was not happy about it. I repeated the process, slowly dehydrating and shrinking each part of the tardigrade until it finally reached its normal size again, and we captured it in its original petri dish. But it was a slow and difficult process, and irritated the tardigrade to no end. But my theory had proven correct, and it gave us a roadmap to getting the station back under control. We would need to dehydrate all the tardigrades back to normal size. Since the tardigrades had co-opted the astronaut ice cream into their DNA, their whole bodies acted like the dehydrated ice cream and could be hydrated, causing them to be enormous, and then dehydrated, which would shrink them back to normal size. But there was another problem. The dehydrator-rehydrator was made for, well, food. Dehydrating one giant tardigrade was a lengthy process. The giant tardigrade wasn't really a fan of it, and he was already in a kangaroo cage. We'd need a much more elegant solution to clear the station. It was time to go back to the journeyman and put flight engineer Kara and station engineer Vladimir to work, and time was running out. If the remaining tardigrades got into the food storage area and found the rest of Professor Andrews' astronaut ice cream, who knows how big they would get. I will tell you all about how we dealt with dehydrating the giant tardigrades en masse next time. But before I end this evening's story, I want to talk to you about something. There's a term I don't usually like to use. It's alchemy, mainly because it brings up visions of early alchemists spinning lead into gold or other such nonsense. The actual definition is alchemy, a form of chemistry and speculative philosophy practiced in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, and concerned principally with discovering methods for transmuting baser metals into gold, and with finding a universal solvent and an elixir of life. So there's a mystical quality to the word that I don't want to get bogged down in right now, but it does apply. Sometimes these specific scientific processes and results are unexplained, like when tardigrades suddenly grow much larger than they're supposed to. And sometimes there's a trait we know about, such as the tardigrade's ability to co-opt DNA from its surroundings, being used in a way we did not know about, like how it was able to work with astronaut ice cream. It surprised all of us, I can tell you that. But the word alchemy has another meaning, a more positive one. You can have alchemy in your life, where certain combinations, possibly unexpected, bring you joy and happiness. A new job, seeing old friends, visiting family, a move into a new neighborhood can all bring unexpected alchemy. It's a combination of things that bring you joy. So actively go and find that mix. Some of the reagents you'll be familiar with, some of them you won't be, and some of them will react in unexpected ways when brought in contact with the other ingredients in your life potion. So as far as alchemy goes, I wish you less giant tardigrades and more spinning lead into gold. I wish you peace and joy. Good night, adventurers.
The Quiet Journeys of Professor Atwood was created, written, and performed by Chris Mancini and produced by White Cat Entertainment. It is a work of fiction. Maybe. Music and sound design by Ron Tansky at rontanskymusic.com. For more info and merchandise, including t-shirts, mugs, and blankets, go to whitecatentertainment.com.